We had a story a few days ago about Alfie and his friend Bernard and about how he was his best friend. So I'll give you a little hint. After this story, I'm going to introduce you to somebody else at our house. But this story is one of our favorites at our house. It's called Proper Words. Annie Rose could walk quite well, but she couldn't talk properly yet. She could only say 4 words. They were Mommy, Daddy, No, and More. The rest of the time, she talked in a private Annie Rose language which nobody else understood. She talked to her toy lamb, and she could turn the pages of Alfie's picture books and read the stories aloud to herself, using lots of different voices. And she was very good at getting people to understand when she wanted something. In the mornings when Mom went to pick up Alfie from preschool, she took Annie Rose along. Annie Rose was always very interested to see all the children coming out of the school. Her favorite person was Alfie's best friend, Bernard. Whenever she saw Bernard, she shrieked with joy and waved her arms and kicked her legs about. Bernard was not very polite to Annie Rose. He would pop out his eyes at her and move his jaw from side to side, and he would gibber like a chimpanzee. But Annie Rose didn't mind. She just laughed and laughed at Bernard's funny faces. One day, Bernard and his mom came to tea at Alfie's house. The moms sat in the kitchen and drank tea and chatted, while Alfie and Bernard went off to play together. Annie Rose wanted to join in too, but they wouldn't let her. They hid behind the curtains and kept as quiet as mice, while Annie Rose went around the room looking for them. She couldn't find them because she wasn't very good at looking. "Quick, there's a crocodile!" shouted Bernard, when Annie Rose gave up and settled down to play on the floor. Then he and Alfie jumped up on the sofa and pretended that they were on a rock in the middle of a river, and Annie Rose was a crocodile in the water coming to eat them up. When Annie Rose tried to climb up onto the sofa too, they pulled up their legs and pretended to be very scared. Poor Annie Rose didn't understand this game. She wanted Bernard to make funny faces at her. "Goo gora da," she said. "Why don't you teach your baby to talk properly?" Bernard asked Alfie. "I'll teach her if you like. Who's that?" said Bernard to Annie Rose, pointing at Alfie. Annie Rose didn't answer. She just pointed at Alfie too. "What's my name then?" Bernard asked her next. Annie Rose answered in Annie Rose language. It sounded like Bora Bladder Doon. "No, it's not. It's Bernard," Bernard told her. "Bernard, Bernard, Bernard," he shouted, and each time he said it, he hit his face in a cushion and popped out at her. Annie Rose thought that was a wonderful joke, and she laughed and laughed. When it was time for Bernard to put on his coat and go home, Annie Rose was quite upset. She held him very tightly around the waist, wanting him to stay and make more funny faces at her. The next day, Annie Rose was sitting in her stroller, sucking her thumb and singing to herself, while she and Mom waited for Alfie outside the preschool. Bernard was the first to come out. He was wearing a paper hat which he had made that morning. He had painted big eyes and rows of pointed teeth on it. When he saw Annie Rose, he spread out his arms and swooped down at her, making loud zooming noises. Annie Rose smiled. She kicked her feet and held out her arms to him. "Bernard," she said. Bernard stopped zooming. "Bernard," said Annie Rose again, very loudly and clearly. "I do believe Annie Rose has learned to say your name, Bernard," said Mom, surprised. "I never heard her say that before." Then all the Mom and Dads, who were waiting too, stopped chatting and smiled at Annie Rose. "Bernard," said Annie Rose firmly, pointing at Bernard and looking around at everyone. She was very pleased with herself. "I've taught your baby to talk," Bernard told Alfie when he came running up to join them. Alfie didn't think much of Annie Rose's cleverness. To tell you the truth, he was rather annoyed that she hadn't learned to say his name first. She was his baby sister, after all. Annie Rose soon learned to say Alfie's name, and many other words too. But from that time, Bernard always made special faces for her when he came out of school. Sometimes he even let her hold on to his hand. When he came to play at Alfie's house, he put her into a cardboard box and shoved her about all over the kitchen floor. Annie Rose liked that better than anything. "More, Bernard, more!" she would shriek happily. I like that one because Bernard ends up being really nice to Annie Rose. And you remember I told you, I have somebody for you to meet. Alright, so we already met our dog Alfie. And this is our kitty, and his name is Bernard. And normally what I was going to say is he doesn't act like Bernard in the stories, but right now he's acting a little like Bernard in the stories. Say hi.